Hey there, this is Ari Whitten, and welcome to the Energy Blueprint podcast. Today, I have with me Dr. Sean Tassone, who is board certified in obstetrics and gynecology and by the American Board of Integrated Medicine. He holds a medical degree, an MD, in addition to a PhD in mind-body medicine. In his 20 years of practice, he's seen over 40,000 women and is a highly regarded patient advocate. As an integrative health practitioner, Dr. Tassone believes you should have an active role in your health. His work includes studies and publications on spirituality in medical care, whole foods to heal the human body, and integrative medicine. He's been featured in many publications, including the New York Times, NBC News Online, and Stanford MedX. So welcome to the show, Dr. Tassone.
Well, I'm glad we finally were able to get it together since I couldn't get the time zone right last time.
Yeah, no worries. And by the way, am I pronouncing your last name correct? I always just call you Sean. So I realized it's the first time I've ever said your last name.
If we were in Italy, that's exactly how you pronounce it. It's Tassone, but
Tassone.
They changed it to Tassone when they came over. But
right.
I mean, growing up, I was called many things by teachers that couldn't pronounce it. So
yeah, well, you and me both. Okay, so first of all, before we get into kind of women's health specific stuff, I have a broader question for you, which is we've had some talks about this in person, or at least one, I think. And then we've had some kind of exchanges on Facebook related to this. There's some conversations that have come up, for example, in the Mindshare health expert group around, like, how should I phrase it? Issues relating to maybe people without enough expertise that are sort of promoting themselves and teaching people about health, and maybe shouldn't be. I know that you're very vocal on this issue. You feel very strongly about it, and I wanted to just bring that up before we got into the women's health stuff, in case you wanted to, I don't know, say something about it. I mean, for example, I very often in like my private members Facebook group will take examples of how people cherry pick the literature, and will point out the mistakes and say, here's the literature that contradicts this person's perspective, and be wary of people who are out there with an agenda, who are misrepresenting the evidence, either out of their own ignorance and lack of scientific literacy, or due to some kind of bias and agenda that they're trying to promote. So that's something I feel very strongly about. I think you do as well. And I just wanted to kind of ask you about it, if you wanted to say anything about that issue.
Sure. And I think it's one of those things where it's on both sides. So I think Ken Wilber has this thing he calls the pre-trans fallacy, which is you can't, both sides can't be right. So the scientists can't all be right, and the woo-woo spiritualists can't all be right. There has to be, otherwise somebody's got to be wrong, right? I mean, and it's the same thing, I think, with this expertise, no expertise thing. I think what happened was you had these degrees that start popping up. Like right now, you can be a doctor of medical science, which is for a physician assistant, and then they're called doctors. So it's really confusing. And what happened was, I think a lot of health coaches, which I think is a great thing, health coaching is awesome, kind of started finding that they wanted to niche. And when they started to niche, then all of a sudden they were experts in menstrual health, or experts in hormone health. And that's fine, but there's the book Outliers that talks about, by Malcolm Gladwell, that talks about expertise and how you really need to have about 10,000 hours or something to be an expert. But you can say anything on the internet anymore. And like you said, there's some people that will quote a study, but it's got 26 participants. Or there's so many open journals now that anybody can publish a study. It's not peer reviewed. And I get it on the other side. Pharmaceutical companies push agendas that they do the research on their own product, and it's amazing, obviously. And so what do you believe and where do you believe it? So it's hard. It's really difficult for me because there's a practitioner here in my city who's a Chinese medicine doctor, and she's wonderful, but on all of her marketing things, she actually puts in there that she is an integrative OBGYN. And I was really nice, and I called her up and I said, hey, I'm a little bit offended because it took me 12 years to call myself that. And I don't call myself a Chinese medicine doctor or pretend to do acupuncture, which would be, you know, if I said I was, that would be offensive to your training. And she got upset with me and said that she was. And I said, well, you can say women's health, but OBGYN is an actual profession. Now we have functional neurologists that are not actually neurologists, or endocrinologists that aren't endocrinologists. And I just think it would be nice if you could just like call yourself what you are. You know, it's like, if you are a chiropractor, say you're a chiropractor. I mean, it's like, why do we have to have all these titles? And I always make this joke, the more letters after your name, the probably less of an expert that you actually are.
Well, that's interesting coming from somebody with an MD and a PhD.
I got bored. That was my PhD was kind of silly, but it was, my mom passed away 18 years ago. And I was kind of a dyed in the wool MD. And I just was reading this crazy book at the time called 8 Weeks to Optimum Health by Andrew Weil. And he was talking about like fish oil and CoQ10. And I mean, this was like 20 years ago. And I was like, man, this is crazy stuff. And so I just kind of, when my mom passed away, I was like, you know what, I got to find out more about life. And then that kind of led to this PhD, but it was more of a personal journey for me than anything else.
Yeah. Interesting. I think there's some issues, like for people who have gone and gotten a naturopathic doctor degree, or they've gotten a chiropractor degree. There's an issue that they combat in those areas where if they say I'm a chiropractor, if they say I'm a naturopath, there's so much of the world that either doesn't understand what those people do, or they have some bit of knowledge around it. Oh, chiropractors are quacks. Oh, naturopaths, you're not a real doctor, you're just a quack, right? And so I think because of those kinds of issues, some people with those degrees, I think, have moved away from calling themselves naturopaths or calling themselves chiropractors. I mean, I know a bunch of them, people I've interviewed on this podcast, who have those degrees, who when I look at their bio on their website, it doesn't actually mention naturopath or chiropractor. They specifically do not mention it. I think mainly just because they're trying to avoid that kind of the public's negative stigma, the public who generally doesn't even know what those professions are. So my point is, I think there's like at least some aspect of it is kind of warranted, just to help those people get around this negative public perception by people who don't actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I think I think those type of degrees to me are a little bit different too than, I mean, they are graduate degrees. Those are people that actually have gone to extra school and have put in the effort. I mean, for the most part, naturopathic school, their 4 years is very similar to medical school. So to me, that's a different degree than some of these other ones that are popping up that are like maybe 1 year more than your bachelor's, but it's like this doctorate of some made up thing that, you know, so that's kind of where I struggle. But yeah, those other ones, I think, because I personally, I couldn't survive without referring patients to naturopaths. And when I had pregnant patients, I'd refer to chiropractic all the time. So, I mean, and I think it's kind of one of those things where, yeah, it's difficult because it's confusing. And then you've got some people, even in my own profession, that charge cash versus insurance. And the whole thing is it's just a mess. And I don't know, I hope it doesn't come down to it, but I have a feeling at some point that the medical boards are going to start really strapping down on people because it's getting a little bit out of hand, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. To get a little personal, I'll say I don't even really know. I tell people this all the time. I don't even really know what to call myself. Like mm-hmm. I've been studying natural health for 20 plus years, and I've done a bachelor's degree in kinesiology. I've done a bunch of certifications in corrective exercise and performance enhancement and fitness and nutrition. I went through a PhD program in clinical psychology. But I have all kinds of expertise, and I've been studying the science around lots of topics that don't even fit within those for many years. For example, my last book was on light therapy. Mm-hmm. My next book is going to be on light. I talk a lot about circadian rhythm. I have a lot of expertise there. You know, so I feel like to call myself a nutrition expert is not the right fit. To call myself a health coach is not the right fit. I basically don't even know what to call myself because I have such a broad area of interest and area of expertise. But
And part of what we deal with in this in the field, in this arena, is branding. I mean, so you want people to find you, you want to get
Sure.
your message out, and Google right now is in the middle of smashing everything. But how do you, like people that search, say, Josh Axe, he's Dr. Josh Axe, but like you said, probably nobody knows he's like a chiropractic physician. But I want women to find me. So I try to brand myself as, expert in hormones. And so it's like, you have to have something to call yourself, which is difficult. And that's, I think, where people are kind of drawing these like fuzzy gray areas. It's like, guru, maven, there's all these words that people are using to connotate like this expertise, or they'll just come right out and say expert. And then the question is, what is an expert? I don't know. It's so blurry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the big takeaway here, at least the one I try to teach people, is like, there's a lot of people out there who are either not as knowledgeable as they are promoting themselves as, or who are, have an agenda, who are cherry picking, who are misrepresenting the literature, and like basically just be wary of who you trust as a good source of information.
Good. Yeah.
So one of the other things you alluded to there is you refer people out to naturopaths and chiropractors often. Right. That in itself is very interesting for an MD, because for a lot of MDs, within who are very hardcore conventional medicine, there's this kind of meme that if it's not conventional medicine, then it doesn't have science to support it. If it had science to support it, it would be within conventional medicine. And that's the distinction, right? So if it's not already accepted in common practice within conventional medicine, therefore it must be quackery and pseudoscience. Obviously, you don't believe that. So why, how did you end up in this place where you've become more holistic, more integrative?
Well, I struggle with that on occasion too, because I have one foot kind of in each side. And so I can get offended on both sides of the fence. And as you've seen in the Mindshare group that we're in, there is a lot of anti-doctor kind of talk. And I don't think that people realize that there's a lot of doctors in that group who aren't of that mold. And it's kind of like Republicans and Democrats almost, it can be that heated sometimes. And it's just, I think that how I got to where I am is I graduated residency with the moniker that we heal with steel. I mean, we were surgeons, and we literally would say that. And it's true to a certain extent that some people do have to have surgery, and it's great when you need it. And Dr. Weil used to say, if I'm in a car accident, take me to the emergency room. If I have a cold, take me to my naturopath. There's definitely a place for everybody at the table. The problem is, I think people are stepping into, like my colleagues will call themselves integrative, but they have actually no integrative training, but they want to get in on the deal. Yeah. So they'll call themselves that. And then people will go see them and they'll think integrative medicine is a scam because this doctor just prescribed me a bunch of birth control pills and all this other stuff. And then on the other side, you have it the other way. So what happened, I alluded to it earlier, was when my mom passed away, I think I just kind of had that moment. I was 34. And I had that moment where I just kind of was like, I started having these kind of spiritual moments where, I would smell my mom's perfume, or I'd have these dreams. And it just kind of was like, there's this tribe in the Amazon that when their boys are 15, they make them drink iboga, which is like ayahuasca, and then they crack them on the head with a rock. And the rock kind of opens their head to all the teachings of the ancestors. And I kind of viewed my mom's death as that rock kind of hitting me on the head. And I just felt way more open to, there's got to be more kind of a thing. Because really, my mom had cancer, and I could understand, it was ovarian cancer, which is in my specialty. The problem was I knew what to do for the cancer part, but where she really struggled was the 5 years that she survived. The chemo was horrible. She would call me crying because her joints hurt so bad and her hair was falling out and she didn't feel good. and I didn't know what to do. I had absolutely nothing. I had all this training and I couldn't give her a quality of life, you know? So my own mother, and I was like, you know what? I just can't, I cannot do this and not be able to help people. And I didn't have it in my quiver. I didn't have that ability to, I mean, I could prescribe Phenergan if you're nauseous, but I didn't know about herbs and things like that. So for me, the integrative training was a way for me to figure out a way, because I don't want to know it all. I can't know it all. So what I do is I assemble a team around me that I can refer to, whether it's physical therapy or acupuncture, you know, psychology, whatever it is. I have people that I have either gone to myself or come recommended through friends, and I think it's good to just have a team, and they refer back to me, you know. So it's kind of working. You know, I have a psychologist here in town who called me. She wanted to refer patients to me. She had to interview me first because she wanted to make sure I wasn't going to be like a crazy person and tell her patients that she was crazy. And so, but now she refers me all these women who are depressed, but actually might have hormone imbalances. And so it really works out great if you can have that relationship, because so many of those providers are minimized by the medical institution, and all they really want to do is help. And rather than me prescribing somebody, you know, Prozac because they have postpartum depression, how much better would it be? There's a psychiatrist here in town who's holistic, and that's what she does for a living, is postpartum depression. So I can just send people to her, you know, and it's that kind of work that's great.
Yeah. In terms of your own personal knowledge, what did you take away from kind of your holistic, your integrative, your forays into natural health that you feel was really important to your current knowledge that you did not get from your medical doctor program?
Well, like I said, it's kind of a daily struggle. It's like, you know, you go to church or something or whatever you do, and then you drive home and you're swearing in your car because somebody cuts you off. It's a constant like battle. But for me, it was the 8 weeks in my integrated medicine program at the University of Arizona that we did on spirituality. And I grew up Catholic. I don't know how spiritual that is, but you know, I grew up Catholic, and what I found out was that there was this connection between mind and body. And through my PhD training, I went to South America. I was buried overnight in a peyote ceremony. I mean, I have discovered.
You were buried overnight?
Yeah, so I had to dig my grave during the day. The peyote shamans, the Huichols, he made me dig my grave all day, and then at night I had to get in it, and he covered me with dirt, and I stayed there all night. And because the thought process is in order to get into to be a healer, to be a shaman or a healer, you have to have a death. You have to die. And obviously they meant more egoic death probably. But what was interesting was my American brain was like, okay, I'm gonna show him. I'm gonna take in all these books, and I had a flashlight, and I was gonna like, you know, thumb my nose at him. And I get in there, and I turned on my flashlight, and I didn't dig very much because I was tired. So it was really narrow, and it freaked me out. So I turned the flashlight off, and I was like, you know, it freaked me. So I ended up being in the dark. But what I found was, it doesn't, and this is cliche, but it doesn't matter, because he was there was a fire, and he was sitting out there singing. And the singing, the Icaros were there to tie me to the place, you know, so I could hear him. And what I realized was, it doesn't matter what I brought in, right? Because I can't see it, I can't touch it, I don't want to look at it because it's irrelevant. But it was him singing out there that was the most important thing. And that was the people talking about me, or the ways that I talked to people and connected with people. And it was just kind of that kind of stuff. So I think for me, when I interact with patients now, it's more like, and I don't do this all the time. Like I said, it's a struggle. Sometimes you're tired, sometimes you're mad, you got to pay your bills, whatever. But realize that when I go into a room with somebody, I'm in their energetic field. And that may sound kind of woo-woo. I have about 20% woo, is what I call myself. But that woo factor is, if you can just be there and realize even something simple like the air that they're exhaling is air you're inhaling, right? So when somebody smokes a cigarette and you can smell the smoke, it's been in their lungs and they're blowing it out and you're smelling it. So we're doing that all day long. And we just, that energetic exchange is pretty powerful. And me telling a patient, you're never going to get better. That nocebo effect is pretty damn powerful, right? I mean, I could hurt people by saying stuff like that versus me saying, you know what, we're going to help. I'm going to help. We're going to fix this or whatever, you know, being more positive, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything specifically with spirituality that you work with your patients on? Is it integrated? Is it, I guess I'm asking, is it integrated just in you, kind of in very subtle ways in how you interact with the patient? Or is it that you're actually like setting into motion, here's these specific kind of practices that are designed to help you better integrate or optimize kind of the spiritual dimension of your life?
Well, shameless plug. Next year, I have a book coming out with Harper that talks about the 12 hormone imbalances in women. And what I did with those was I turned them into energetic archetypes, like the nun, the queen, the mother, the overachiever. You know, there's 12 of them. And in those 12 archetypes are six. Each of those has 6 steps to correct the imbalance. And one of those 6 steps is a spiritual practice. So say like, for a queen, which is estrogen dominance as a hormone imbalance, in order to be a benevolent, so there's 2 types of queens. There's off with your head type of queen, and there's a benevolent queen. And so how do queens survive? How do they survive the Game of Thrones, if you will? Well, they surround themselves with good advisors. They have family. They tap into that maternal archetype. So I will recommend for them as a spiritual practice to spend time with their mother, spend time with their sisters, connect with women's groups in the area that you can just build that rapport. Or it might be something like journaling. You know, I have a lot of people that have low normal cortisol who they have low cortisol because they're fried, they're burned out. I had a lady the other day, pharmaceutical rep, drives 200, 300 miles a day, you know, has 3 kids under the age of 7. She's fried, and yet she's going to the gym. And so her spiritual practice would be, I literally told her to go out and walk and not work out. Just walk. And while you're walking, maybe repeat a mantra like, I love you, over and over and over again. Stuff like that.
Very cool. I like it. So you mentioned hormonal balances. Let's talk about what these 12 types are. We don't have to go through all 12, but maybe you can give kind of an overview of some of the key principles of that differentiate these 12 different types.
So what happened for that was I was realizing over the last few years that I was repeating myself over and over and over again. And that's because I was hearing the same stories. So these archetypes are just stories. So hormone imbalances tell a story. Most of these, and that's what I distilled down into those 12 archetypes. So far and away, the number 1 hormone imbalance in women is testosterone deficiency. I see it all the time.
Really, more than estrogen dominance.
I thought it was going to be estrogen dominance, and I've reviewed this with my patient population. I've got about 20,000 women that have taken my quiz online, and it's about 36 questions. I thought for sure estrogen dominance would be number 1, and it's not even close. Testosterone deficiency is by far and away in all age groups.
Wow.
And testosterone deficiency, I call the nun jokingly because the good nuns don't have sex, and you ain't getting none really. So that's the other thing. But nuns, so it's all the archetypes. They're not negative, right? So there's benevolent queen, there's a off with your head queen. Well, nuns are great because they're the only nun that maybe wouldn't be great would be a cloistered nun. So a nun that's secluded, right? A nun that doesn't want to go out and do anything, because testosterone is a hormone of feeling good. It's a quality of life hormone for women. And so women that have testosterone deficiency sometimes will cloister themselves because they don't feel like doing the things that they used to do. They don't want to go out with their friends because they don't feel good, and they're kind of run down and they're tired in the afternoon. And I would hear this story over and over and over again. And so, and then, decreased libido, obviously. And we know libido isn't necessarily testosterone driven, but if you don't feel good because you're run down and you don't, body image, whatever, you aren't going to be interested in sex. So I'd hear these stories over and over again. So when I talk about these archetypes, it's not just like a negative thing. There are definitely positives. Nuns are, they're very loyal. They're very knowledgeable. They are very, they're very serious. They have a lot of positives to bring, but you don't necessarily want to live there your entire life. So it's okay when I say these imbalances are a problem, is when they interfere with the way that you want to live your life. So a lot of these women will come in and they'll say, I don't want to have sex. I don't feel like having sex. And I say, well, first of all, who's asking you to come in? Is it your husband or is it you? And she'll usually say him. And I'm like, well, if I made you make a list of 10 things today that you had to get done, would sex be on the list? And I will tell you 100% of the time it's no, it's not on the top 10. For guys, it's probably in the top 3 somewhere. So there's that mismatch. So it's just more of a relationship thing at that point. But yeah, far and away testosterone deficiency. So all of the archetypes have a storyline, but then there's also a 6-step correction. 1 being a spiritual practice, 2 being hormone balancing, which I can do with the actual hormones if we need it. Something I call Infoceuticals, which is a la Harry Massey. The Infoceuticals more the energetic information that's transferred to the body. So that can be through acupuncture, essential oils, things that convey more of an energetic balance, Reiki, healing touch. Nutrition obviously is hugely important, exercise, and then finally supplementation. And so I combine all 6 of those things for each of those storylines and have a plan for everybody.
Gotcha. Okay, so I want to go back to, there's actually like 5 questions that I want to ask after everything you just said, but I want to go back to testosterone. So it's interesting. I've interviewed at least 2, if not 3, at least 3 other women's hormones experts. And I don't think testosterone deficiency has ever come up once. So this seems to be
we all specialize, I think, in different things. Most of the people that I know that you probably talk to either deal with PCOS or obesity. It's probably a populational bias that they see. I tend to see probably a wider range of people, so I just see different things, I think. But it's like I tell the lady we did an interview with you, Nat Kringudis. I tell she sees women that all day long that hate their IUDs. They hate them, and so she hates IUDs. And I'm like, but I have put in thousands of IUDs, and I hardly ever have people that want them out. So because of her population, and I think it's the same thing with me. Maybe I see women that are older, like maybe in their 40s and 50s, and so they probably have more of a testosterone deficiency. But and women in their 20s and 30s probably have more PCOS and estrogen dominance. So it is probably more of an age group thing.
Yeah. So what do you see as the main causes of testosterone deficiency in women? Is it some of the same causes as testosterone deficiency in men, or does that differ?
I think it's obesity is a big one. I think it's lack of moving your body. I think
Does it need to be obesity per se, or like just excess body fat?
A little abdominal fat, yeah. Abdominal fat's the killer. Same thing for men. I mean, it increases estrogen levels. Estrogen then increases sex hormone binding globulin, dropping your testosterone levels down a little bit. I think the ovaries are just overwhelmed with environmental toxins, pollution, the stuff that even EMFs, and I mean we don't even know the tip of that iceberg. You probably know that better than I do. And I think women nowadays are so toxic with birth control pills. I don't know if that really ever. There's a big argument right now. There's another physician out there who has a book out, and she's really pushes birth control pills and girls that are 12 to 14 and how they don't need to have periods because the period's annoying. And it's like, yeah, but do we really know what a birth control pill is doing to the brain of even just a teenager, but a woman in general? Sarah Hills, I think her name, just came out with a book on oral contraceptives and what it does to your brain. And
Jolene Brighton also.
Yeah, and Jolene's book, the post on birth control beyond the pill, is a great book, and I recommend that to a lot of people. And
I had her on the podcast recently.
So Jolene sees all the bad stuff with birth control, just like Fiona McCullough does PCOS, and there's a lot of great information out there. It's just getting the diagnosis, and actually getting the labs, whereas that's what Jolene does. And some of these people guess, and sometimes it's hard to guess. You really need the lab work.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So list off those main causes. Okay. So obesity or excess body fat, stress.
Diet. I also think that we're just, I just think that the ovaries make about 50% of the female's testosterone levels, and the adrenals make the other 50. I think with overwork, not sleeping, the adrenals are kind of getting a little bit squashed. So I think I don't like to call it fatigue or insufficiency because it sounds, I don't know if that's a real thing or not, but it's just one of those things that I think does add to it because it just doesn't put out the same amount that it could. And then I think a lack of sleep is probably a huge factor. You can see my dog in the corner there. He's trying to go outside. But I mean, so I think those would be the main things.
Gotcha. Okay. So next thing I want to go to is estrogen dominance. So talk to me about what that is, first of all. So what does it mean for people listening? What does it mean to be estrogen dominant? And what are the main causes of that? Or what are the main symptoms? And then let's talk about the causes.
Estrogen dominance is basically either your estrogen is just too high, but usually I look at it more as too high compared to your progesterone. So you could have normal progesterone and a super high estrogen. You could have a normal estrogen and a very low progesterone, which would be kind of two things. It would be not just estrogen dominance, but also progesterone deficiency. Symptoms of estrogen dominance, breast tenderness, mood swings, irritability, irregular periods, weight gain, headaches, just kind of water retention. I call it jokingly choke a bitch syndrome because you feel, think of estrogen as a very stimulatory hormone, and then progesterone comes in and kind of calms everything back down the second half of the cycle. What happens is they're constantly being stimulated by this estrogen and they just feel wired all the time. And then they don't have the calming effect of the progesterone and GABA and things like that come in to help them sleep and recover. And so they're constantly just being barraged by estrogen. And they just feel like they want to, these are the women that come in and say, I'm yelling at my kids. I don't know why. I'm not like this usually. I've gained, 20 pounds in the last year. My periods are all messed up, and then it can throw your thyroid off. And so it's just it's a lot of just kind of that, irritability, mood swings, weight gain. Probably most of the women that come to my office complain of stuff like this, hair thinning, headaches, things like that.
Gotcha. So these are the two most common hormonal imbalances: testosterone deficiency, estrogen dominance. Is there any other one that is remotely close to this?
I would say subclinical hypothyroidism, or what I call the underdog, is super common nowadays. It's one of those things that's like, it's really making a big rise right now. And I would say it's a really close second to estrogen dominance. Again, that's interpretation of labs and symptoms. It's not just normal, abnormal. It's like, how are you feeling? Weight gain, hair thinning, can't get up in the morning, can't stay awake during the afternoon, and a free T3, which is 2.4 to 4.4, and you're 2.4. The doctor looks at that and says it's normal, but you don't feel very well. And I can bump that up to 3.3, which is still normal, but you might feel a hell of a lot better. So it's just one of those things. It's just it's symptoms. So it's like, do the patients feel better with a little bit of thyroid? And it's hard because the medical boards they're really starting to crack down on people that are prescribing thyroid meds if the labs aren't abnormal. I mean, there's doctors all around that are getting nabbed for this now. And it makes me a little nervous because I have so many people that feel better in the 50th percentile versus the 5th percentile, for a lab value. And so, I mean, I can defend myself, but it's kind of sad,
that doctors are getting in trouble for it. Yeah. Well, I think there's also this kind of issue of the lab ranges of what's normal kind of getting narrower and narrower, and people rightfully, I think, at least in some cases, asking the question, how much evidence is there to support that this particular range is better than this range? And I think in many cases, there's just a lack of evidence. It just hasn't been tested very well. Right. And so to some extent, it is kind of this speculative jump to say somebody will feel better if they're in the 80th percentile as opposed to the 20th percentile.
And I think it gives credence to this possibility of, bio individuality, or whatever word we want to make up. But I mean, somebody like you who's super active, work out a lot, got muscle mass, you got kids, you got to do all this stuff. You might need more thyroid hormone than somebody that sits on the couch. And so for you, you might not feel good at a 2.4, whereas somebody else is probably like, yeah, I'm fine. I don't feel anything different.
Yeah.
So I do think but that going along with it, because of the way that you live your life, your thyroid probably isn't an issue. But I mean, but there are people genetically, I just think that, and that's another thing is that I didn't talk about, was just the genetic possibility of the way that your body is shaped, the way that you gain weight, trying to live past your genes, that whole epigenetic stuff. That's probably 10 episodes that you could do on that.
Yeah, indeed. So I want you to take me through on testosterone deficiency and on estrogen dominance. Take me through like sort of a brief example of what the SHINES protocol, your 6-step protocol, looks like in each of these cases. And I know that there's lots of other variables for each individual patient, but kind of give maybe a couple examples of how this would work.
So I think what I would say with estrogen dominance would be like, so I talked about how I think women that have that estrogen dominance, I call them queens. They need to surround themselves with what I would call good advisors or friends or females that can tap them into that maternal or that female archetype to kind of get those women involved in your life that are a positive influence, that aren't going to, like, you want to be the benevolent ruler. You don't want to be kind of that off with your head type person. Hormonally, for estrogen dominance, you want to get the estrogen down. And the best way to do that in many instances is weight loss, but you can increase your fiber intake so that the fiber holds on to the estrogen, and use D-glucarate or glucuronic acid to inhibit the glucuronidase enzyme in the stool so that the estrogen doesn't jump back off the stool and go back into the bloodstream. So you can eliminate, and that way you can also improve detoxification pathways in women that have livers that aren't necessarily detoxifying. You can get women off of birth control pills, get their diets fixed. So infoceutical wise, I would say, I send people to acupuncturists all the time for hormone imbalances. I don't know what they do because I don't know acupuncture, but there's energetic integrator number 9. I think it's a big one that works on the ovaries. And
so just to be clear, you're lumping acupuncture under the sort of umbrella of Infoceuticals, or when you say Infoceuticals, you're specifically talking about Harry Massey's thing?
Well, I do refer people to Harry's products, but I just kind of use Infoceuticals as a word because it fits into the SHINES. It's the I. Yeah. I could come up with a better name like Information, but yeah, I use Harry stuff. If people don't want to do acupuncture and they just would rather put the water drops in, there are some essential oils that I'll recommend. Clary Sage is a good one for estrogen dominance. I'll refer people to Marisa Snyder, who you probably have had on your show.
Yeah. Actually, as you're mentioning, we're thinking about this and mentioning names, I realize I've had like 6 or 7 female hormone experts on instead of 3.
No, and I know them all really well. And they all have their things. Like Maritza, she's a naturopath that really knows the bottom out of essential oils. Mm-hmm. And so nutritionally, obviously with estrogen dominance, you want to increase fiber intake. You want to decrease phytoestrogens in the diet. It's not as big a deal anymore. I think we consumed a lot of phytoestrogens about 10 to 15 years ago because it was cool to eat soy. Exercise, anything that's going to increase metabolism, get you moving a little bit more, burning more calories, getting rid of the body fat, whether it's, most women could be 10 to 20 pounds overweight and still have estrogen dominance. It doesn't have to be a ton. And then supplement wise, like I talked about glucuronic acid, you can use DIM if you have a detox pathway that pushes more towards the harmful 4-methoxy pathway versus 2-methoxyestrone, which you can find through Dutch testing. So it really just depends on, obviously there's tons of supplements. I'm more of a purist when it comes to supplements rather than using a formula. I like to use the actual product, for stuff like, I'd rather use glucuronic acid than some, estrogen decreasing, proprietary blend, because then I don't know exactly what's in it.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So you mentioned soy a minute ago. I want to dig into that a second. And I also want to go back to the infoceutical thing. So my understanding with soy is that it's mostly been kind of given a bad rap unnecessarily, and is maybe not like most of the literature reviews I've seen recently have indicated that it's not necessarily a big problem when it comes to creating any negative hormonal side effects. But I think I've looked maybe more in the literature at like, does it cause problems for men as opposed to does it exacerbate estrogen dominance in women? So what's your take on soy?
Well, I think you have to eat a lot of it. So, I mean, for women, they're having, you're talking 25 to 50 grams a day. I mean, it's quite a bit. I think that would be like 6 glasses of soy milk, which probably nobody's going to consume. And that was big.
I know some vegetarians who are consuming like massive amounts of soy milk every day.
So, I mean, it's just like anything else. I mean, if you have, and I'm actually doing a podcast with Alan Christensen fairly soon. We're going to talk about how estrogen doesn't cause breast cancer, or else every woman would get breast cancer. But I think if you have a genetic makeup that predisposes you to breast cancer, and you have higher levels of estrogen, the estrogen could be the fuel for that DNA damaging issue. And so it would be the same. It doesn't matter if it's from plants or not. It's still, if you have that family history, I just don't think you need to consume it. And being a muscular guy, and you understand the whole thing with testosterone and estrogen in men, men don't want estrogen either, not too much, because, you need some, but too much then can have all of its other problems. I mean, any guy that's gone on testosterone therapy that has had, problems with, it can actually slingshot the other way, and you can feel horrible because your estrogen's too high. So, and some guys aromatase, they do aromatize more than other men. And it's the same, women do the same thing on testosterone therapy, but we really don't give them enough testosterone to do that. But if you're directly consuming a phytoestrogen, it fits that lock and key fairly similar. The nice thing about it is it doesn't, kind of what you're making reference to, like a birth control pill will hit that lock a lot harder than a phytoestrogen will. So the synthetic hormones are much stronger. So you might have a much higher increase of breast cancer risk with a birth control pill, because it's 7 times stronger than hormone replacement with a bioidentical hormone. And phytoestrogens are probably even a little bit weaker than that. So it really also depends on how hard those receptors are getting hit.
Gotcha. Speaking of Alan, I know he put out an article recently actually reviewing soy consumption in thyroid and how it affects thyroid health. And basically, to make a long story short, the conclusion is that there isn't really good evidence to warrant like soy avoidance to support thyroid health. But that's definitely a different context than specifically estrogen dominant.
And I think it's like you said, I mean, for most part, and I'm this way with just anything. Moderation is probably a key. And, I don't know, I'm not a vegetarian, so I don't know how hard it is to not consume phytoestrogens, but I think it's just like, it's like the carnivore diet or whatever. It's like, is any one food just good for you to eat all the time? I mean, I don't think it probably is, or else we wouldn't have all these different types of foods to eat.
Yeah.
But again, that's a political battle that we probably shouldn't get into. But,
yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to go back to is Infoceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some of the NES products and the kind of bioenergy scanner, and then the software that makes all these recommendations based on it, and the Infoceuticals and stuff like that. I have some very big problems with it, and an extreme degree of skepticism. I don't want to go on and on about my sort of my skepticism around that, but I'll just say my skepticism is pretty much through the roof when it comes to that stuff. What has led you to the conclusion that there's validity to it?
It's not, I guess I wouldn't say that I feel that it's necessarily validity as much as I say that I'm kind of agnostic. So, I mean, I put it out there because I feel like we are all about options. And in my opinion, I do, and I'm going to talk about that in my book. It's not necessarily that it has this gobs of research behind it, you may be taking drops of water in water and it does absolutely nothing. But we also know that Prozac has a 60% placebo effect and it works pretty well.
Yeah.
So if Infoceuticals do something similar, and I'll put it out there, I mean, it might be placebo, but maybe it's doing something, maybe not. I think.
Well, let me ask you this, because we had a little bit of an exchange recently in private conversation where you were calling out muscle testing or applied kinesiology, and which I completely agree with you. And I've reviewed the literature on that extensively, and it's very clear that from the science that has tested it, and there's a bunch of good studies on it. The science is very clear; it's no better than random guessing. So any sort of seeming effect from that someone might feel they're getting as far as this is accurate diagnosis.
And you probably know her too, Terry Cochran. She does it all day long and she helps tons of people. It wouldn't be something that I would probably refer a patient to, because I just, I might talk to them about it if they wanted to do it. I don't see the harm in it, and maybe, they're spending some money. But I guess it's just one of those things I don't need. And you know how studies are, they could probably find a study that would say it does work. So,
well, interestingly, I had I talked about it in an episode with Alan Christensen a while back, and I had a woman who did her PhD dissertation on muscle testing, who reached out and said, Dr. Christensen and Ari, I think you guys are really misguided on this, and here's my study showing that it does work. And the specifics of it, I reviewed her study, and basically what it showed was they muscle tested true false statements. So they had people say, like, for example, if I muscle test you and say, your name is Stephen, or your name is Sean, your name is Stephanie, and we did a bunch of statements like that. Or I said, you have a dog, or you don't have a dog, simple true false statements like that. What they found is that muscle testing had a 59 to 65% accuracy, whereas random guessing would be 50% accuracy. Okay. Yeah. But the other part of their experiment is they also removed the human tester component. So they used a grip strength measuring device, right, which measures it objectively instead of relying on the subjective measurement of the muscle tester. And once they did that, they found there was a 50% chance of getting the true false statements right. So basically my response to her, I cited a bunch of the existing studies, and I said, all these studies, including your study, really show that it's no better than random guessing. So my feeling on it is like, yes, if I muscle test you and say, you should eat broccoli and start meditating and start exercising and sleep 8 hours a night, and just give you a bunch of sort of common sense, good health advice, the muscle testing could have been translated into something genuinely beneficial and healthful. But at the same time, how much do we really want to support the use of things that are just placebos, or basically just an elaborate form of guessing?
I think what can be done is you can be, and this is not my forte for sure, but you can be gentle about it. And I think do what you're doing is you say, hey, and I'm getting better about this. I really respect what you're doing, but here's what I see. And what you'll find is that people do get offended pretty quickly when you start doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because especially coming from a physician, they feel like I'm just poo-pooing them. But it's really, I think it is about empirical data. That's very important. I think the other side is trying to make empirical data not as important. Like they talk about the N of 1, which is, if you're the one person that it helps, does it matter? Well, I guess, so it's definitely a debate. I would love to have a national conference, and call it N of 1, and have this kind of stuff that's talked about, where we have these kind of anecdotal things that are floating around in the medical community that, this is one example of it. And, I've been muscle tested by Terry, and I do think that sometimes she pushed harder, because you can't push exactly the same every time.
Yeah, I've been muscle tested by a lot of people, and they absolutely, every single person I've been muscle tested by, if you pay attention, they absolutely alter.
You're super strong. If you put your arm out there as hard as you can, I don't think Terry Cochran could push your arm down, because
the particular position is mechanically advantageous enough. Like,
Okay.
this is a little biomechanics fitness speak, but basically the muscles that are involved in lifting your arm up from this position are very small muscles that,
Oh, okay.
and when the lever arm's fully extended like that, if someone pushes on the hand, a very weak person, even a child, could push down the arm of somebody who's very strong, because the muscles that they're using to pull or push that hand down are much bigger muscle groups that basically have the potential for much greater strength.
It's like the lat is pulling down versus the deltoids or something.
The front delt, yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, we all know how hard it is to do side raises with a 5-pound weight, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I will say, I think it's mostly benign, mostly placebo, but I actually have heard examples where it's disastrous. Like somebody's extremely ill. They're going to see somebody who's muscle testing them and giving them a genuinely wrong diagnosis. So, these are stories I've heard from a practitioner friend of mine who I've had on the podcast named Dr. J.E. Williams, where like he gave the example to me of somebody who was in acute liver failure or nearing liver failure. And the person that was muscle testing him was saying, your liver's fine. You don't need to do what those other doctors telling you to do for your liver. And he listened to the person that was muscle testing him, and the guy died. So I do think it's for reasons like that I don't necessarily think these kinds of things are just benign. And I do think that we need to kind of, speak up against things that we know that have been tested and have been shown not to be valid. Like if something has never been tested, I'm not trying to squash anything that's like never been tested or is outside of the realm of the current body of literature. We should explore things and with an open mind. But if something has been tested and it's just not valid, then we need to recognize that.
And I think it's all about common sense. I mean, don't say if you got somebody whose doctor is telling them to do something, just be an adjunct to that, but don't negate it. You know, I mean, you would hate it if they negated what you said. I mean, it's like, I have that happen to me all the time. I have patients on a really low dose of something like Armour thyroid or something, and they feel great. They feel better than they felt in 5 years. They'll go to their endocrinologist, who will then take them off their medication saying they don't need it. Mm-hmm. And because because their labs were normal, and they say that, you know, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. So she'll go off of it, and then she feels horrible again. Right. And it's, why can't we just, you know, work together? And that's two doctors, let alone, you know, could you imagine, you know, trying to deal with a complementary practitioner who already is a little bit, you know, feeling inferior. So, but I think if the whole point with the Mindshare group that we're in is to try and make it work where we can work together and do stuff like that. And it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, even in the group that we're in, there's negativity on both sides.
Yeah.
And I think at some point, if we could, you know, I'm sure, you know, somebody like our friends that do muscle testing, they're really good at it, and maybe they help a lot of people. But if they didn't, if somebody was getting worse, that they would refer, like, or that they would say, you know, you need to see your PCP, or you need to go do what they told you to do. Mm-hmm. Don't negate it. Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, I agree. I want to be sensitive to your time here. I have a few more questions, but if you have, I want to make sure you don't have to like jet out right now.
Like
5 minutes, 10 minutes?
5 minutes, maybe.
Okay. So I want to come back to specifically testosterone and what would kind of the SHINES protocol look like for that? Kind of just a quick run through of some of the key things for correcting testosterone deficiency.
It depends. Testosterone deficiency. So for that, for like a spiritual practice, obviously I don't want those women cloistered. So I want them to get out and experience nature. Like, even if it's just going out hiking, you know, getting outside, going out with your pet, going out with your kids, just getting outdoors and not allowing yourself to just stay in the bed, or even if you don't feel like it. Like a good friend of mine, Christina Wise, who you probably know. She's been going through a little bit of a time, and she didn't want to go out, but her daughter came and got her every day and made her go to yoga. And she said that was literally what saved her, was that she had that person taking care of her and doing that. Otherwise, you stay in the house and you just become secluded. So just kind of getting that out there and doing that. Hormonally, obviously, testosterone replacement. That's kind of a rocket ship to get you there, right? I mean, you're going to get there a lot faster.
Yeah, you jump to that as like a kind of a first option, or is that after you've exhausted all the?
I give women, it's not like a step by step. I give them all 6 things, and you can pick and choose. But testosterone will get you there the fastest, obviously.
Sure.
Infoceuticals.
Don't you have to worry about downregulating their natural testosterone production if you're doing that?
Not as much as in a man. I mean, a woman, not nearly as much. I mean, you're talking about a low testosterone for a guy of about 300, whereas a woman is low as 6. I mean, you really just, it's not the same.
Okay.
And so for the informative side, it's more about like self-care. It's more about going to a Chinese medicine doctor. I send women all the time for decreased libido, and they'll do the needles. I don't know exactly what or why, the meridians they choose. But for some people that seems to work. And acupuncture is one of those complementary medicine type therapies that actually has some research behind it. We know it does for fertility for sure. And I think more is going to come out regarding, but it might just be the relaxation of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
The nutrition is obviously super important too. I think, cleaning up the diet, obviously you probably know a lot more about this than I do, but getting rid of processed foods, eating more clean foods like proteins, good fats, because your hormones are made from obviously cholesterol. And that's the other thing, is we're so afraid of cholesterol these days that we tend to stay away from fats. I think that's changing. Supplement wise for women, it's really, I'm a huge fan of maca. The problem with maca right now is that years ago, the Chinese came in and bought all the maca in Peru. And then what they did after they pulverized it was they mixed it with a bunch of other stuff. And so if you just buy a bulk maca, I can't tell you for sure what's in it. I'm a huge fan of Feminescence, which is a great company called Symphony, because they came in after the Chinese bought all the products and they bought all the land. So they pay fair wages. They've done a ton of research on maca, and it's a really solid company. A guy named James Frame is the president. You should have him on. He's a really, really great interview.
Yeah, I met him a few years ago and talked about all these different variations of maca that he has.
Some solid stuff. But so that's one of my favorite things for supplements. Obviously, a good fish or flaxseed oil is great. Magnesium's great. But yeah, you can use things that don't have a ton of research behind them. Yohimbine works fairly well, but it can be a little bit, it's got a real narrow window of safety. So you could, take too much of it. Tribulus, which is a Google lipid, probably not as much research on that one that's positive, but bodybuilders use it all the time. That doesn't mean it's good, I guess. But there's things you can try.
Yeah, excellent. So you have these 12 hormonal types. Is there a quiz that people can go take on your website to figure out what type they are?
So if you go to Tassone, TASSONEMD.com/quiz, it'll give you the quiz. And eventually what I'm going to have is the book is going to be more of a kind of like you can just go right to your particular archetype. But you will get an email after you take the quiz that tells you what you are, and will give you some information about it. And then I do have some hormone reset stuff that's, like $9 to get you, it's a week-long program. I also tell you free stuff like, at the end of each, it's kind of the Wim Hof method, but at the end of your shower, try to turn it cold for like 30 seconds. You might have to work your way up to it. I can do maybe 10 right now, and I can't stand it any longer. Maybe eating one little square of super dark chocolate, 87% cacao. And that's actually a fun thing to do too. If you probably have done it, but I've tasted all the chocolates going up in percentages all the way up to 100%. Mm-hmm. And it's like trying to eat that. A friend of ours, Summer Bach, she likes the 100%. Uh-huh. I don't know how she eats it. I can't physically get it down.
Yeah, it's an acquired taste. I mean, I would have found it disgusting a few years ago, but I've actually learned to like it as well.
Do you consume it a lot?
Yeah, well, that, and I also consume like just pure cacao sometimes in hot water without any sweetener.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's actually quite nice.
Good for your cardiovascular system.
It is indeed. Yeah. Awesome. So thank you so much, Dr. Tassone. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate your time. And so people can go to your website, and you had I'm trying to remember, I was going to say something. You have a book coming out relatively soon, right? When is that coming out?
It won't be till next fall.
Next fall. Okay. So fall of 2020.
Correct.
Okay. Excellent.
But I do have stuff on the website, so you can start there.
Yes. Excellent. Oh, now I remember what I was going to ask. The types, these different hormonal types that you've formulated, you've actually, I assume, like kind of dug into the data on people's labs and things like that, and actually looked at the correlation of like how often a particular type means that someone is likely to have testosterone deficiency or estrogen dominance. Like, I guess I'm asking how, without actually looking at labs and getting these hormones measured, from these symptomatic based and subjective based kind of questions, how accurate do you feel they are in helping people figure out their hormonal balance?
First of all, yeah, you made a good point. It's an answer based on your answers. So it's not like a lab, right? I had a lady email me once and she said, I just took your test. It says I'm hyperthyroid. It's wrong because I'm actually hypothyroid. And I said, okay, when was the last time you had your labs checked? And she said, oh, it's been like 6 months. So she emailed me back 2 weeks later and said, oh, your test was right. I was actually taking too much medication. Now that might be an outlier, but the way that I'm a math major in college, I majored in math. So the back end of my quiz, it's a huge grid. And what I did was I took these 36 questions and these 12 archetypes, and each box has a symptomatic question, and I weighted each one. So from 1 through 10. And then there's a grid on the answer sheet. You can either answer middle, totally me, or totally not me. And based on which button they hit, it hits that as a multiplier. And then all of these grids add up at the end, and it gives you the highest one. So it's a little bit, I had a hard time with my web developer because he couldn't understand my grid. But I do think that it's probably, I would say, I mean, obviously I haven't I haven't talked to everybody that's taken the quiz, but I'd probably say 90% of the time it's pretty darn accurate, but it's only because
I thought you were going to say 70%. So that's great that you have
I can say
high confidence.
I'm probably a little biased, obviously, but it's giving you an answer based on your answer. So if you answer the symptoms accurately and you're honest about it, it should be pretty accurate, right? I mean,
yeah.
Unless you're not answering it very well, like you say that you like to have sex, but you really don't, something like that.
Unless I go on as a man, as a 36-year-old, and start answering as a 73-year-old woman.
You try it and say, you should try it and try to skew it and think you have it. Like, you could go on and say, okay, I'm going to have estrogen dominance, and answer the questions like you think you have estrogen dominance, and I see if it comes up estrogen. I have done that. And
if the result is like you are a 36-year-old male, I will be supremely impressed.
No, I don't. Well, actually, I do have one. It's the testosterone excess is actually an archetype. It's called the warrior. So you should get that one.
Okay, cool. Dr. Tassone, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a blast. I really appreciate it. And again, the link to go to your website is Dr. Tassone /quiz. Is that what it was?
TassoneMD.com.
TassoneMD.
/quiz.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Really a pleasure, and look forward to our next chat.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.